This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.
Welcome to the Property Subcommittee meeting of the City Council of Easthampton. We're meeting remotely per Governor's order. So we are in several meetings discussing the school reuse, the three schools. We've toured the building. We've heard from many people. Regarding minutes at this time, Councilor Zaret has submitted some, and I believe the committee would like to review them and maybe deal with this at the next meeting if that's okay with the committee members. Omar?
Yeah, that's okay.
Sure. Great. At this time, we have public speak. Is there any member of the public who would like to take a bit of time to speak? I see Michael Burdick. Maybe you could identify yourself.
Sure.
Their residence, where you live, and tell us.
Yes, not to cause confusion, but my name is Michael Owen Budnick.
Budnick. I apologize. These.
No, I meant the Michael Owen part, which.
Michael Owen Budnick. Oh gosh.
Yes. So thank you. JP asked me to come on for a few minutes before I head off to rehearsal. So I know some of you, but for those who don't know me, again, I'm Michael Budnick. I'm known professionally as Professor Micron, which is why I look like a mad scientist. I run Mad Science and Art Ventures for Kids. So I'm a theatrical guy, but also an entrepreneur and an educator. And I have had an interest in Pepin Auditorium, preserving Pepin Auditorium for some time, and been discussing it with the school reuse committee. In particular, I live in Easthampton, by the way. I live around the corner from Easthampton Bank. And I am been in the Valley for 11 years. And I am very active in area community theater in a number of towns, on my way to Westfield right now, also doing one in Northampton right now as a director, producer, actor, singer, wherever I'm needed on stage. Just love it. So my interest in Pepin Auditorium is as a community theater, as a home for community theater. And most importantly, I don't believe that this important community resource, which can be preserved, that this need is in any way in conflict with the very important area of affordable housing. We have many, many examples of buildings such as this coexisting, their auditorium and or gym, with affordable housing that goes on around it. Exit 7 in Ludlow is done that way. The Memorial School in Wilbraham is being used by Parks and Rec. West Hartford has an old school that it uses for all kinds of classrooms and things like that. So people who are portraying this as a zero-sum game, either affordable housing or preserve these spaces, I think that that's not where we're at. I would love to see some weighting to the use of the auditorium for this reason. Why Pepin? It's the perfect size to return community theater to the city of Easthampton, which is 1 to 200 in seating. It has a commissary area which can be used for generating revenue, for food. It has class space adjacent, which is wonderful. It's one of the things that community theater gives back to the community, which is educating children about theater and theater arts. And a community theater needs a home. It can't be a temporary resident in somebody else's facility and survive very long. It needs places for costumes. It needs places for props. It needs places to build sets. It needs places to rehearse. And all of this requires kind of a home. And this is why, while we love what's being done at Town Hall, it has a wonderful small theater, it's going to be a very large theater as well, it is not necessarily appropriate for community theater, which is not for profit, but guess what? In many, many, many cases that I've been involved in, very, very self-sustaining. It is a wonderful draw. It has the potential.
Could you, one more minute, please?
Yep. One more what? I'm sorry?
One more minute.
Yes. It is a potential draw. It's a magnet for people to downtown. It is not mutually exclusive with the town hall theater. It serves a different purpose. There's a lot of precedent, and and there's a lot of people that are very interested in it, including people that are very experienced in community theater management. So we would like to see the RFP weighted towards preservation of that auditorium space. We would love to work with a housing authority the way they do in Ludlow, in which we are surrounded by things that are important for community housing, but also preserving this very important community space for a wonderful cultural opportunity. So that's why I came on here today, and thank you so much for letting me speak. Did I miss anything, JP, that any point?
I think I know you had gone over several things when you had called. So I'm glad you were able to express that. Thank you.
And thank you for having me. Now I'm going to go off and direct something else. Sorry about that. Come see Marvin's Room at Westfield Theater. Wonderful place.
Always good for a plug. All right.
And Die Fledermaus in Northampton at the Academy. Both of which could have been in Easthampton. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to say a few words? Saying none. Omar, do you see anyone else? No. All right.
No, I don't see anyone.
We were going to look at some assumptions that were made by the committee or by the report, the Mayor's Reuse Committee, and also maybe some of the numbers, and also hear from the consultant on changes and discuss weighting this evening. I believe that was the agenda. If there's anything else, please say so now so we can kind of try to budget the time for this evening. I know Councilor Zarrett has said he has a commitment shortly, coming up, I believe, at 7 o'clock. Okay. Just want to take a brief look at, and maybe in the report, Emily, as I recall, there were some assumptions made about what could be used, or what was needed in the city in terms of public spaces. Do you recall that section?
Yes, in fact, I've got it actually up on my screen because it was the first change in sort of.
I was thinking in terms of city departments.
Oh, city departments.
Yeah, because I think there was a statement that said that there were no need for anything.
At the time the RFP was written, yes, I think nothing had been identified as being a specific need. The meeting that I attended, your last meeting, there were a few departments that came forward. We did not, I'm just looking at the language change, we did not specify specific departments within this because we wanted to leave it flexible for continued community and future developer conversations. But I'm happy to, receive direction and see what else we can do in terms of making this a document that is workable for the city.
I think that we had focused very, very diligently on affordable housing and the need for affordable housing. And let me say, I am the first one to say absolutely yes, I'm on board. And I believe my fellow committee members are also. The one other question, though, is that these are public buildings. They're owned by everyone, and everyone has a desire to certainly express that desire and be considered. And I think the statement in the report was that there's no department in the city that needs all three buildings. That's how it was worded.
Yes.
And I would hope that no department in the city would need all three buildings. I think the question was, is there a portion of a single building that there's a need for, or will, so was there any studies done to discuss that subject?
That I will defer to Jeff Bagg, the city planner. I'm I was focused on the condition studies of the schools and obviously the recommendations that came out of the downtown strategic plan. I don't know if there were specific studies done at any point on the departmental level.
So I will ask Jeff, would you, I know we've spent some money to have a consultant help with the reuse of the buildings. Was there any studies that were completed?
So the quick answer is no. There were no formal studies done for which departments would need or not need the space. But what has happened is this has been common knowledge since 2018 that these 3 school buildings were going to be, their destiny was this exact kind of discussion that we're in now, to seek the reuse of them. And I see JP left me. I'm gonna pause my statement because I can talk about other things casually for a moment to see if he pops on. It's uncanny timing to
Jeff, while he's off, I just have a question. I mean, I would assume that if there were needs identified by the city, both via individual.
Yeah, I'd prefer to wait for JP to come up.
Okay.
Okay. He's back.
You're muted, JP.
I apologize. I lost you for a moment. My
Yes.
connection wasn't good.
Okay. So as I was saying, there has been no formal study done. I think that was your main question, and the answer is no. But as I was saying, this the reuse of the schools and the questions about what they will be used for has been in existence since 2018. There has been no department who has approached us with any serious ability to take them on. So I think what you solicited at the last couple of meetings was some input from the Parks and Rec department. I think that they had, the idea of preserving the gym had come up in the downtown plan. And so the ideas are all conceptualized in the downtown plan. We heard, a lot of public feedback from residents through that downtown plan, that the intergenerational use, the cafeteria was identified, the gym, all the spaces were identified as, desirable spaces. But that was at the community input level. And so, where we are at now and where we've been for the past year is putting kind of the rubber to the road and testing the financial feasibility of taking the city, keeping that building in any way, shape, or form. And to date, no one has come up with a financial plan to take those on. I cannot, and I'm not speaking for the mayor, and I can't speak for the mayor, but what she has said is that her desire as the mayor is to not keep these buildings, any of them. And I think because of the financial burden, the potential costs to the city and the residents and the taxpayers is presumed to be very high to keep them. But what I think, JP, as you solicited people to come to the meetings recently, there are, the Park and Rec said, the director, as you kind of quoted last night at the city council, it would be a parks director would say it's a loss to lose a gym. But without a financial plan, to fund that's where I think city council needs to take all this input and really make sure that you understand the implications of that. In terms of, I just want to touch on a couple other things quickly because it's a good opportunity to just air some of this out. But the Council on Aging, the previous director was aware that the schools would become available and had no kind of desire or to make effort to evaluate them. And I think the current director is of the same mind. I know we heard from the board of directors at the last meeting, but I think the current director, and she should come to one of these meetings, possibly the next meeting or the public hearing. But I think the concern on Council on Aging is to trade one old small building for one old large building that is not really purpose built for the Council on Aging. The library, Emily Wilson Library Board of Directors did make a vote that they were not interested in pursuing the schools. And that's something that they voted on record.
If I may interject just for a moment, I did have a conversation with Marge Prendergast, the former, don't believe she's the president anymore of the Library Association, but she certainly has an ability to speak on behalf of the library. And she said no one ever asked her that if a portion of the building might become available. So I thought that was interesting, is that she said, yeah, there are programs that we have, there are things that we do that may very well work out. We haven't ever thought that that was a possibility. And I know one of the pictures in the report, a beautiful picture of the Emily Williston Library right across from the Pepin School. And its proximity is there, and they certainly had expressed an interest in a portion, or at least exploring that possibility. So I don't know, there were never no one ever talked to them about a portion of the building. Is that correct?
I don't know. That's coming, I've not heard that from Marge myself. And I mean, I think I don't want to belabor the point. I think the question was no formal studies have been done. But I think what you're getting is a lot of anecdotal potential interest. So that's, fair. I think I don't want to jump ahead because I know Emily had some information that she was going to go through. I do have a couple questions about some of the phraseology that Emily was able to take from the last meeting and put into the RFP, and it relates, but I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted, you had brought up the cost of the buildings, and I think that certainly is a fair topic to try to wrap our heads around, because I believe the report had said that the buildings cost $220,000 to operate as schools for all three schools. Is that?
Yep, the spreadsheet's been provided several times. It's posted on the website, so I don't have it available to me now, but it's broken down by school. Yep, that was information was requested and it had been provided for a while.
Yeah. And I'm trying to share my screen here, if I might.
Yep. I would just add that doesn't include any staffing.
No, I know it doesn't include staffing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, let's see, sharing screen. Give me just a moment here. Is that up there? No, window. And no. Sorry, bear with me one more minute. Does anybody else have those figures? No. I think they're important to try to understand because I think the figure of 220,000 includes an operating building for all three. And the question really is, well, how much would it cost to operate a portion of one or a small portion? And could certain systems be isolated? Was there ever any thought given to that?
Right. So, these are very specific questions. We may need to kind of go over these and answer them at the next meeting. I can fumble through and find that spreadsheet and put it up.
I've got it, and I wish I could just put it up.
It's a fair question, JP. I think what you're nibbling at around the edges at is, it's a substantial investigation of that building. No one's going to be able to determine how complicated it would be to get into that building until a professional consultant is engaged to do just that.
Right.
And those are the costs that the city has not wanted to incur.
I guess just for a moment to look at the operating costs, it cuts the $221,000 down to about $96,000. That would be the cost for Pepin alone. And if Pepin alone, that would be as an operating school, 24, all day. The place is heated certainly to a pretty high temperature at night. Also, I don't know if there could be any savings by turning the heat down or not, but and the heat itself was the major expense at $50,000. So presumably not all of that would be required. And if
Yeah, I mean, I could have just, there's a couple other things so we have not gone all the way down this road. And I know just for informational purposes, because I think you're not wrong. What you said was not wrong. But what we have heard, and I think it's trying to get, the questions that you're asking are fine. And I think getting people to answer them other than
people are asking us these questions.
Well, yes. So we should be talking about how to get you the best answers. The thing that I would like to pass along, because this is all kind of an anecdotal level conversation, is that the school department has been, knowledgeable that these buildings are going to be surplused. If you go back to the master plan since 2008, and JP, you were around. I think the initial attempts at building a new school started with the elementary schools and was kicked around, and then the high school got picked. And in 2008 master plan, it really describes that the elementary schools were, outdated then. So what I'm trying to say is that the school department, whether they'll, we should talk to someone at the school department, has a lot of deferred maintenance that they have not done because they're aware that the schools were going to not be in their possession any longer. And I think since 2008, there are things. So I guess my point is that there are a lot of costs that are unknowns,
right?
That go beyond just that spreadsheet. So I think we just need to be having some of these conversations a little bit more broadly to understand.
We don't need to belabor the point anymore. I think I'm happy to entertain any of the thoughts that our consultant has had. If the rest of the committee is agreeable to hear from Emily.
Yep.
Good. You're on. You heard us at our last meeting?
I did, and I found it very helpful, so I appreciate that opportunity. Let me just share my screen, and I'm going to walk you through the changes that I've made in response to what I heard at the last meeting. This is obviously still a draft, and I know you have tonight, and I'm delighted to be able to be here with you tonight, and also we're meeting again on the 14th. So Jeff has this, and then he also has the spreadsheet that I prepared as a mock-up of a weighting system. So I'll take you through both of those. But let me first start with the changes to the text. Now, I did do another review. Whenever you're doing documents like this and you get a chance to look at it again, you always look for typos again, because you can never look for typos too many times. So
we don't need to deal with the type. Yeah,
exactly. So I did make a couple of those changes.
Enlarge the screen. I'm having reading that print.
Yes, so I'll zoom in a minute. The other thing I want to say is there are obviously some dates that are in this document that will be changed once it has gone through your process and once it's gone through City Council's process. But the reason I left them in is because they're a good indication of the timeline, the spaces between when things happen. So just so you all know, and anybody who may be looking at the draft in future understands that those are still there. So let me zoom in a little bit. So before I do that, just so you'll see these comments on the right-hand side. You'll see the green text, which is linked to the comments. When you get this, so you can go through and see what happens. All you have to do is click on one of the comments, and it will take you to the text that it's referring to. Just again, for anybody who's not familiar with working with a commented PDF. And what I've done is I've indicated why I've made the changes. And again, these were all in response to the meeting we had last week. So just zooming in a little bit, this is in the section that describes Pepin School, what Pepin School is, what its history, and I've added this text about the connections. And you'll see as we go through this document that text in one place has had a change on text in other places. So I'm going to take this change by page, but I'll use it to address what we've changed and why as we go. So this one, we're calling out the fact that the gym, and we added the cafeteria auditorium. I changed it from cafetorium, which was the original text, just because not everybody may be familiar with that term. Reinforce that both of these are important community resources, and we're looking for creative ways to reuse it as a priority for community members. And then referring to the new Section 3, or the Section 3 development goals and objectives, which now has new text that talks about how the city might retain one or both of these spaces for adaptive reuse, and the public-private partnership that we mentioned at the next meeting. So that's the first change we see. And I don't know if you want to talk about each of these as we go through, or if you want me to show you the whole chain of changes, and then we'll come back. So I'll pause here.
Have a preference? Does anyone from the committee have a preference? No?
I want to see that all first.
Okay, great. Then I'm happy
Agreed.
to do that. So then the next change is that Section 3, and we had originally had some text about the city of Easthampton working with the private developer for upgrading public infrastructure and how that might work. I've now included that with a new header that says public-private partnerships, because now we've got two things in this. One is that original text, and the second is text about the adaptive reuse of the gym and the cafeteria auditorium. So this says that if the respondent chooses to retain either of these spaces or both, and you'll see where that comes into the evaluation criteria later, then the city is going to expect to enter into a form of a public-private partnership to lease the spaces for community purposes. Now, I've identified a number of the purposes that we discussed at that last meeting. So, and that was from both you all as committee members and counselors, but also some of the things that I heard from the public who were speaking at the time. So community basketball, other indoor recreation, space for the Council on Aging or community-based groups, multi-generational center, space for makers and artists, or other uses that could support community interaction. So again, those are a mix. I left it at that general level at the moment because I'm assuming, this might be a big assumption, so if I'm wrong, let me know, that as the city council decides, first of all, whether or not they put the RFP out, if they do put the RFP out, it will be going through a process. I'm assuming as that RFP moves through its process, the city is going to continue to discuss options. You'll see when we get to the financial section, section 4 here, that we've got some additional requirements about information that we would like from the developer that may aid some of the city's thinking about what could go here. So again, leaving it general, trying to send an indication of the types of things that the city has heard might be of interest, but also leaving it general enough that if the developer comes back with developers, multiple proposals come back with some interesting ideas, you have some flexibility to respond to them. So then the next thing that comes in is this Section 4. This is the requirements. I'm going to zoom out for a second. So you'll see Section 4 is the requirements and conditions for the submission of the proposal. And one of the things that they have to submit is pro forma financial projections. And so what I've added to this section, and this was in a response to, again, what I heard at the last meeting, but more specifically, the idea of affordable housing and community space, affordable housing or community space. It felt is part of that conversation that you all really needed some numbers to work with. And so this section says, if you're proposing to keep the space, we'd like to know what the financial implications are of not having the affordable housing. So we ask the person responding to say, tell us how many units of affordable housing we'd get, what that looks like with the space, and then tell us what it is, what it would cost, what we need to happen in order for the city to be able to retain that space. And that includes the asks, and we talked about this at the last meeting, the asks from the developer to the city that I need X, Y, Z. And that might well include, again, was not extremely specific on this, but understanding just from my tour that the HVAC units, for example, the boilers are in a different part of the school. I imagine there's going to have to be some sort of discussion about, how those work. This is the time for the developer to say, hey, I see your idea for community space. I'm on board. I'm making the proposal. X number of units could fit here. If you want to keep it for community spaces, this is what we need from you in terms of staffing or additional costs to help defray the costs of doing this, or whatever that might be. So this is where they would put that. So then the next thing that happens is we have to start adjusting the evaluation criteria. And what I've done is we had our first two evaluation criteria were originally affordable housing and the community connections. I've split up the idea of community connections so that number 2 is specific to Pepin Gym and Cafeteria Auditorium. And I've created new criteria based on the conversation. So the first is the not advantageous. The proposal doesn't retain either. So if they don't retain either spaces, they get a 0 on this, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the weighting. The proposal retains either or both spaces, but it doesn't. The respondent doesn't provide the requested information, because that is a critical part for your ability to make an informed decision. So if they just say, sure, we're going to retain it, but we're not going to, and I don't expect anybody who's going to retain the space to do that, but covering the bases, if they don't provide you the information you need to make that decision, then it's not advantageous. Advantageous is retaining one or the other. And obviously they have to comply with the requirements in 3 and 4. And then highly advantageous is retaining both spaces. So it goes none, one, or both. Now, because of that, I've also changed 3 slightly. Now you see that I've left indoor community space in 3. And there's a reason for that, is that somebody might choose not to retain either the gym or the cafeteria auditorium, but they might put community space in Pepin or in Center or in Maple School. So the idea is that if they do that, they get if they don't retain anything in 2, they get a 0, right? But if they do retain something, or they put new space in one of the other schools, then they get points under this section. So they're not getting double counted. And I think that's important. Then I reordered the next few a little bit as I was reading back through the criteria and listening to your questions and some of the comments from the public. I felt it would be important, especially as we get to the idea of retention of existing buildings versus new construction, that this gets reordered a little bit better. So responsive design, which is applicable to anything they do, whether they want to do existing buildings or new construction. Environmental sustainability, that's the same thing. That's applicable to either one. So if they retain, they would be eligible for this, and if they go forward, they would be eligible for this. I'm going to explain on new construction because I think there's a little bit of confusion back and forth. Same thing, retention of existing buildings has mostly stayed the same. Oh, sorry, I jumped one. Number of sites in the proposal. Now, somebody sent a comment to Jeff earlier this week about the number of sites, and as I read back through the text, I recognized that that comment was correct and this was confusing. So I've changed it to not advantageous, is that the proposal is only for the Maple School. Advantageous is the proposal including Center and Pepin as a single site. And then highly advantageous is all 3 schools with Center and Pepin treated as a single site. There is always the possibility, and I've noted this in the text, oops, sorry, wrong one. I've noted in the text that somebody might send a proposal in for either Pepin alone or Center alone. That doesn't meet the minimum criteria. The minimum criteria is that they have to have Center and Pepin as a single site. Honestly, I'm still going back and forth on the wording of this one a little bit, so I'd be interested in your thoughts. But I don't want to change it too much before our conversation today.
Emily,
Retention.
may I
Yep.
ask a quick question?
Of course.
That has to do with the reason, could you explain to the committee and to the public the reason for a single site treatment for Center and Pepin?
Yes.
Since they had 3 buildings, they had 3 different operations. It would help.
Absolutely. As we looked at Center and Pepin, there were a couple of reasons for that. And I think we only briefly touched on this in the last conversation. So I agree, it's important to bring it forward now. Center and Pepin are connected by a street, and Center is quite a small school. And the idea of having relative to the number of units that can come out of it. The idea of having 2 developers working simultaneously in, developer 1's trucks come in to work on Pepin, development 2 comes in to work on Center. The idea that it would be highly advantageous to have those treated as a single site for coordination during construction, but also coordination of design, that the design and the linkages between those 2 sites would be really important to ensure a consistent treatment of that area. So that was the original reason for putting them as a single site. It's the coordination of development efforts, but also the coordination of design efforts. I think there was also some thought, and I'm reaching here, so if I remember this incorrectly, I expect either Michael Owens or Jeff to jump in on me, but I think there was some thought that Center might not be completely viable on its own as a development, and so the idea of linking the 2 of them would make that a stronger proposal coming back to the city.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So then for new construction, so I altered this a little bit, and most of it is just to make sure, it's more in the clarifying the text a little bit, but it's to make sure that when you get to the weighting section, if the buildings are retained, the existing buildings are retained, then the new construction gets all zeros, right? There's no points for new construction if there is no new construction. So there's not a double counting there. And we can talk about that a little bit more when we get to the weighting scenarios. So 9 has been renamed. It was originally schedule, and I changed that because I've introduced a new timing section. And this came out of our discussion of these last sort of basic criteria. So 9 talks about the control, which is how long the city has to retain control of the buildings, and therefore is paying for the operation or the continued heating, cooling, et cetera, of the buildings. So the text hasn't changed that much, but the category name did, and that's because of the new timing. Experience, I added in the need that if the respondent proposes new construction, that they have to show us that they have experience with new construction. So you can't say that, yes, you've rehabbed 20 schools, but you've never actually built something new on a site that requires demolition and reconstruction and new construction. So we want to know you have the experience. So I've added that. In terms of timing, so as we were talking through last time, I thought about 2 issues that had come up in a previous RFP process that I've been involved in, and it came up in terms of evaluating the schedule that the developer proposed and the performance that the developer proposed. And I realized as we were going through the criteria that we didn't have as strong criteria on those 2 things as I would have liked. So I've added these 2. One is, in terms of timing, is to make sure that as you're looking at the schedule the developer proposed, that and looking at the references that you're getting, that you understand that they have in the past gotten a certificate of occupancy and a lease up within a reasonable time of their original proposed schedule. So as you're calling the references and the criteria for what they have to submit references. That you can call them up and say, hey, they promised that they were going to get this done in 2 years. How long did it take? And if they said, well, actually, it took 5 years, then that gives you the opportunity to weight them as a lower weighting. In terms of pro formas, this is really the ability to balance the proposals against each other. So not advantageous is that the direct financial benefit to the city is lower than other proposals. Highly advantageous is that obviously it's higher than other proposals. But I've also put in there that this came directly out of our conversation last week about the pro forma line items and the narrative commitment to the community benefits. So it's not advantageous if their line items do not match the community benefits. Advantageous if they appear adequate, and highly advantageous if it looks like significant support. And again, this is likely to be a comparison both in terms of what they write and what they put in the pro forma, but also against proposals. So if you have multiple proposals with multiple options, differing options from each, this allows a comparison. And then interview, I didn't change much, but the idea is that the interview, actually I don't think I touched it at all. The idea is that you want to feel comfortable as a city that that the developers will be responsive to your questions throughout the process. And the questions asked can also, along with the weighting scorecard, the questions asked can also be determined in advance. So with that, I'm going to stop talking about this and just check and see initial reactions. I know you'll also want to look at this and think about it before the meeting on the 14th. But if there's any initial questions on this that I can answer.
Committee members?
I don't really have any questions. I'm very pleased with it. I feel like the consultant heard us and made appropriate adjustments. I think this reflects both concerns of the council as well as the community, and I think so. Thank you.
I would agree that I think everyone who had attended was indeed heard, and adjustments were made, tweaks were made, and I think this is a better proposal. If I could go back quickly, if you could just turn back to the beginning of this section.
Of the evaluation section?
The evaluation section.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just see if I can do it without having to scroll too much. There we go. Let me pull so you can see the whole thing.
Actually, that wasn't the section. Maybe we need to go to section 3 and 4.
3 and 4, okay. Let's see. Oh, a little bit. Okay, so this is section 4, and this. Let me just jump up here.
I guess my question, if I could just summarize, it would be what actual requirements are there in the RFP? Things that don't bother submitting if you're not going to do this.
Excellent question. So there's
maybe we could underline those or highlight them so that everybody is clear.
Absolutely. So section 3, the development goals and objectives. So this is on page 24. It says respondents to this RFP must address the following program in their proposal. And so that lists out the proposal requirements, and you'll see, I think I might have forgotten to mention this, the continued community use of, and there's a typo there, sorry about that, of the Pep and Gym and Cafeteria Auditorium is discussed on page 25, which is the next page. So that links down to the adaptive reuse discussion there. So there.
Can we go back up one? I read about the requirement is be required to include bicycle storage as part of the plans.
That is, yes, that is correct.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Yes. And I think that if that did not come out of the downtown strategic plan, then it did come out of the school reuse committee. I don't remember which one, but it was through those discussions.
Mm-hmm. Please continue.
Absolutely no worries. So it's the housing, an understanding of the impact of the neighborhoods in terms of design, traffic, and parking, and the traffic and parking management plan is part of that. Integration of community amenities includes the Pep and Gym, discussion. Wayfinding signage, so welcoming the public to public uses. In other words, you can't just set aside something for the public but not tell them that they're not allowed to use it. And that gets to the idea of the parking and playgrounds. You'd be surprised. Safe pedestrian connections from the buildings to tenant parking, tenant open space, and public sidewalks. So we want to make sure that's in there. And then also for anything that's open to the public, there have to be safe pedestrian connections there. You know, we're aware if there's multifamily housing, there are obviously vehicles moving around, and want to make sure that people know where the people go and people know where the vehicles go.
Wayfinding.
Design that's compatible with the neighborhood and responsive to the surrounding neighborhoods. And that's true whether the buildings are being retained or whether it's new construction. So we want them to be thinking about that. And then stretch energy code, which is obviously what Easthampton, the city of Easthampton is already has the stretch energy code, but also ADA requirements for the multifamily housing. The buildings have to be updated. Preference for sustainable design, and you saw that in the criteria. And then the MERV 13 air filtration, which is a high standard of air filtration. For multifamily housing, we had some discussion of this in the reuse committee. That was felt to be important, so that's in there. And then we wanted the flexibility of more than one conceptual plan. So if they prefer to submit options, we welcome those options. Strongly encouraged to use the 40R smart growth zoning, which obviously was modified so that the schools would all fall under that boundary. And if they don't use it, they have to tell us why they're not using it. And then we note that the criteria gives them some options for how they're actually going to meet those requirements. So that's the first set of things that they have to do.
Yeah.
And then the second set of things they have to do is section 4. And this is the conditions for actually submitting the proposal. And it's everything that, you know, when the city gets the packet, all of these things should be in that packet. So it's the cover letter, which introduces it. We want who the people are, and then a narrative of the team members and structure, their recent development experience, their response to section 3, their response to the criteria. So all up front, you know, we've read your proposal. This is who we are. This is what we've done. This is what we promise in response to the things that you've asked us. This is how we rate ourselves on the criteria and why, so that you've got that right up top. Then that gives you the opportunity to go through and say, they told us they were going to do this. Let me look at the rest of this and see if that's actually true. So they have to talk about what they're going to do about affordable housing, how they're going to market it, how they're going to lease it up. They need to talk about a narrative of the benefits and the impacts to the neighborhood, the narrative, the concept, explaining what they're trying to do. They have to provide conceptual design drawings showing interior unit configurations and exterior improvements, including the community benefits that they're offering, the project development and construction schedule, the preliminary development budget, the pro formas that we've already mentioned. And then on the other page, is that it? I think that's it. Just check. Yes, that's it. No, there's not. Sorry, a couple more up to the top here. Evidence of financial status. So that's the bank references, if they have more than one. Letters of preliminary interest in terms of funding, so you know that they've got that capacity. The forms that are required. We talked about that a little bit at the last meeting. And then all the supplemental information at the back, the resumes, the descriptions. So these development teams will have multiple firms, right? They're going to have the overall developer, they'll have the architect, sometimes an interior architect, they'll have the GC, they'll probably have specialists for HVAC and civil, environmental, so forth and so on. So they have to give descriptions on all the responding firms, examples of the projects that are relevant in scale, and references for completed projects, ongoing management, and their financial status. And in some cases, the reference for completed projects and ongoing management may be the same person. So, but we want to make sure that you hear not just from how the development experience has been, but assuming that these affordable housing are rental units, also how well have they been managed over time. So that's in there as well. I think you're muted, JP. Sorry.
And price paid, is there a price associated in this at anywhere?
It goes into the pro forma. It's not frequently with buildings like a school building, because of the deferred maintenance, because of, especially in an older building, the potential presence of some hazardous materials. Frequently, those don't go for, they're not sold for a value. They have a negative value in many cases, which is really hard for community members to think about, because they're like, this is a school. This is a huge asset to the community. But when you look at adaptive reuse, they don't have value going forward. What you are looking for, though, in terms of value to the city, because remember, they're sort of taking these on and doing all of that deferred maintenance, all of that addressing. What you're looking for is, what are they doing in terms of community benefits? That's one value. And the other thing is property taxes. And so you'll want, and I believe I put in here, yes, number 13, please include projected revenue to the city. So that it includes two things. Typically, it's the annual property taxes that you're likely to receive. It's also the permitting fees. So what will they be paying the city in permitting fees in order to do this?
Will there be, so the tax benefit, I think, is very important to many people. Regarding the price, we have 3 appraisals that were recently done on the property. And it's all public information.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I thought it was close to $1.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I added up together. That wasn't, $100,000 or a negative number at the very least. So, but there's a point where someone could write that down. I guess the other question I had around that is, what about requests for further CPA funding for the project? How does that question get answered? Because if you're saying, well, we're going to offer you a price, and it may or may not be very much, and we'll offer you a tax benefit, and we'll talk about those things. Will there be a requirement to discuss what other monies would someone be looking for from the community?
You'll see that in the pro forma. So the pro forma will show you the revenue, and they'll show you the development, the anticipated development expenses. And in that revenue stream, in the what's called the financial stack of how they're going to finance this project, if they are looking for CPA funds, you would see that in the pro forma on the revenue side. And Jeff, I see, I didn't want to jump ahead of you, but go ahead. if JP obviously allowed.
Let's see, just one quick second.
Yep.
We were talking about the developer.
Yes. So just have a look at the when you see the pro forma, the evaluation committee, anybody who's looking at this would look at that revenue side. And
that also will include the low income tax housing credits.
Absolutely.
Credits, historical credits, if that's they so apply, etc. Good.
Exactly.
Yeah, you were going to ask a question.
Yes. Well, I was hoping to chime in a little bit on this discussion. JP, I think you're asking some good questions, because as the city council votes to declare the property surplus, presumably, and then release the RFP, there are a couple of required actions that city council takes. One is to identify the requirements that go out attached to the buildings with the RFP. So going through those lists of requirements is important, because that is an action that city council actually has to take to identify the requirements of the buildings or of the city. The other thing is about price paid, or the sale price. So that is something that city council is going to have to discuss. For information, in background that has come up over the past year, in talking to all sorts of people, generally at the committee level, at the reuse committee, was that we have these wonderful buildings. We as Easthampton think they're wonderful buildings, but they are going to be very costly. So we are asking, we're not quite begging, but we are really asking for a developer to please, take these from us and help us accomplish our goals, which is primarily affordable housing. And to do that and be competitive with many other communities who also have surplus buildings and have other, it's a competition. So we want to, I think that last time the description of setting the table to make this appealing is really important. And the discussions that we have been around letting the properties go for $1 as one opportunity for us to really entice a group to come and help us take on these buildings. So the price paid is something that the city council has to talk about this, but the appraisal was done. It's required to be done in order for the city to potentially let them go for less than market value. So that was a step that we took proactively on that. And then, because I don't want to lose my train of thought, on CPA funds, the other information that we did get along the way was that we need to expect a developer to ask for CPA funds. We do expect them to have CPA funds in their pro forma, and part of the reason is because the renovation of the buildings will be really expensive. But what we have heard over and over again is that DHCD, who is they're the funding agency who does the low income tax credits, they expect to see the city with the so-called skin in the game at financially at the table with the developer to make sure that the project will move forward. And so we don't have exact dollar amounts, but we did go to CPA committee. We had conversations with them, in the range of $300,000 per building of CPA money was a ballpark figure that we talked to CPA about, and they wrote a letter of support. It's on the webpage. It's in the packet. And part of what we were trying to do is be transparent with housing developers that they should have some level of comfort to know that the CPA committee would be financially at the table with them and with the city. And I know from conversations all around, the importance of affordable housing and using CPA money. That's one of the three primary purposes we can use that for. And the city has not used a lot of the CPA funds for affordable housing. And so when we talked to CPA, they wanted to know what the dollar figure was going to be. And we explained that we can't tell them until the RFPs come in, but that notion of, a substantial commitment. So the numbers that we used were $300,000 per unit. I mean, not per unit, sorry, per building, was the frame of mind that we brought that to CPA, and just to get a sense of, in talking to Valley CDC, those were a couple of things that Valley CDC, who, the city is funding them to help us navigate this process. Those are the things they said is set the table with a low cost for the properties, and then expecting to contribute CPA money were the things that the housing developers would want to see.
Thank you, Jeff. I would like to just briefly ask Councilor Zaret, who had said he would be leaving around 7, if he would like us to continue with the discussion about the weighting or not. Omar, you're still here. I can't see you on the screen with the shared screen.
Yeah, so it looks like Omar left too. So I guess my question is, if Omar left and I need to leave, we may have to adjourn, Mr. Chair.
That would be the case if you leave.
I mean,
yes. So we could continue the discussion.
Well, I'd be interested.
It's a very important discussion for all of us to hear.
Yep. I mean, I read the 3 weighting scenarios, and if I can stay briefly if it's possible.
I don't want to rush that section because
okay.
I think it's really important that we give it due course. I would be happy to meet again to discuss it if there's another date between now and the 14th, if that makes sense. Or just go to the 14th. Did somebody say the 13th?
No, I think it's the 14th.
I know we're meeting on the 14th, but did somebody say that they were available on the 13th also?
I would suggest keeping the 14th.
Oh, I'm not saying don't keep the 14th. I'm just hoping that we can accomplish the weighting and any other requirements and then be able to sensibly report back on Thursday. Sorry, not Thursday, but the following Wednesday.
Yeah, I don't mean to barge in, and knowing that Councilor Zaret has to leave, I would argue that the weighting is not overly complicated once we get into that and decide where the weight should be given. I think my quick would be to push that to the 14th and have that discussion. I had two things I wanted to ask while we still have Councilor Zaret and Councilor Kozinski, because it would be hard to capture this on the 14th. JP, is it okay if I ask two questions? Because we kind of went through the whole list and haven't circled back. I had two things I wanted to air out with the two counselors so that maybe we can give some direction to Emily before the 14th. Is that acceptable? Okay. In terms of the requirements, one thing that I think when we first met, we had a quick discussion about the minimum number of affordable units. And I don't think we fleshed that out. And so just again, for reference, a 40B project, the minimum number of affordable units is 20%. And the 40R district that we amended has a minimum number of affordable units at 25%. And so I just wanted to ask that because I think we need to probably establish a minimum number of affordable units that we're willing to accept. So that was really important that if we could just even acknowledge that that's something that we should see on the 14th, I wanted to try to get that out.
So you're saying that discussing the possibility of 20% or 25% or some other figure being the minimum number of affordable units that we would consider as a requirement. I think we have to have a minimum number. I mean, if somebody came in and said, well, I think affordable housing is great, but I want all market rate units, and they did everything else in the proposal, I wouldn't be at all comfortable in any way with that kind of a proposal. So, yeah, I'm certainly willing to entertain a minimum number.
Okay, and I appreciate that, JD. And it's really maybe it's whether it's a requirement or whether it's in the evaluation criteria, some way for us to look at that. Because if they come in with only 10% affordable units, then that may not be what we're looking for, and I just wanted to touch on that. So the other thing really quick was, it was early, it was on page 17, I think. I apologize, I don't have it up. With respect to the city, it says that the city would expect to enter into a public-private partnership, and that word is strong. And I just wanted to have that conversation because later we get to look at the financial elements of that, and if we're expecting, and when we broadcast that we're expecting to go into a public-private partnership, kind of regardless of what the financial impact is, then that might not be the most level approach. So, I think we would consider entering into a public-private partnership because and that's not deciding tonight, but I just wanted to put that on the table so that we can talk about that on the 14th.
I kind of thought about that myself. I was wondering, consider, anticipate, entertain.
Yes.
Maybe words that more convey my feeling on the subject about the other committee members or the full council. But I'm glad you brought that up.
That's great. So I think as long as if we could talk about that on the 14th, that would be helpful. And then the last thing that I apologize because I thought we were going to go back, and I just want to get it while the committee members are here. The reference to makerspace, I understand why Emily put it in, but I just wanted to quickly talk about it because in my breadth of looking at this whole thing, I understand the conversation about the gym. And I understand about the cafeteria, the auditorium, and even the rest of the building. But to specify makerspace, I would be concerned that a proponent could come back in with makerspace, and over time, the community, need for makerspace it's nice to think about, but it doesn't, in my professional assessment, it doesn't like ring the bells of the things that we've heard as much as the gym or the auditorium. So maybe for the 14th, I just wanted to think about that, including the reference to makerspace, because if we look at makerspace versus affordable housing, I just don't think the two are on the same playing field, kind of, for lack of a better analogy. So
Good.
those are my
Excellent.
questions that I just want to move to the 14th too.
Yeah. Michael, you had your hand raised earlier, and I just want to be sure that you had, I think you raised your hand a couple of times.
Council, I just wanted to follow up on the idea of skin in the game. Oftentimes, these state funding sources are going to look very favorably upon an easy acquisition by the nonprofit or the affordable housing developer. They see that as the city having skin in the game, offering these properties maybe below their appraised value. And then, of course, CPA commitments to affordable housing. Those items will be looked at favorably by state funding sources. And we all know that, the city alone cannot fund the affordable housing development at these three buildings, nor could we fund the community spaces at these three buildings on our own. That's all.
Absolutely. And I will just mention briefly, I appreciate the discussion here about the CPA not funding affordable housing in the way it has funded historic preservation and other categories. I fully am full appreciation of those numbers. It is not to the level of the other categories. So that being said, anything else from anybody briefly? We will go, Emily.
If I may, just very quickly on the weighting scores, it's important, obviously, that the criteria must be set before the RFP goes out. The weighting can move in a parallel track as long as that's done prior to the RFPs being open and the evaluation committee being set. So happy to go through it on the 14th, but just in terms of the balance of your time, I want to make sure that we get the RFP set and that the weighting can be a continued conversation as city councilors get a chance to plan. That is obviously not the final model, but it's just a way to start thinking about how these can work. So I look forward to walking that through that with you on the 14th.
Thank you. Councilor Zaret? I would entertain a motion if there's no further discussion.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second. I thank everybody for making this evening. Appreciate it, especially those whose day ended or the week ended on Thursday. Thank you, Michael and Jeff. You are still having the Thursday schedule, but thank you for making. We appreciate it. Good night.
Have a great evening.
Good night.
A vote. We should actually vote in favor. Motion to adjourn. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
This government meeting is brought to you by Eastworks and our local cable subscribers.